I'm Tessa, and I've been employed in Europe for the past year or so. For me, the transition has been positive, new experiences, new people, a new beginning. I left my parents and my younger sister, Janet, behind when I returned home. To be honest, though, we weren't exactly a close-knit family. If you can call it that, Janet and I have this strange relationship. Since she is 8 years younger than I am, we have always been in separate phases of life. She was still playing with dolls when I was coping with the drama of high school. I had already graduated from college and was concentrating on my job by the time she reached adolescence. We essentially lived in separate universes, only coming into contact on holidays and for family dinners. We no longer communicate much beyond sending each other happy birthday and Merry Christmas notes. I own my own home back home before I moved overseas. It was a lovely apartment that had once belonged to my grandma. The way that happened is funny. I got an excellent career in finance after college and started earning a respectable salary. After working for 3 years, I made the decision to buy my own home instead of continuing to rent. My parents then brought up the apartment my grandmother had bequeathed to Mom in her will. Over dinner one evening, Mom informed me, "We've been renting it out, but if you're interested, we could sell it to you." It appeared more ideal the more I about it. I had spent many Sunday afternoons visiting Grandma, helping her water her favorite plants on the balcony, and enjoying her wonderful chocolate chip cookies in the quaint kitchen. I knew that apartment like the back of my hand. The location was excellent, and the pricing was reasonable. I therefore purchased it. I made it my home for the following 3 years after paying them $120,000. Then the European opportunity presented itself. Better pay, travel opportunities, and new challenges made it too good to refuse. Of course, I kept the apartment. Since it was my first significant investment, I reasoned that I could always return to it later or rent it out. Janet's name appeared on my phone while I was browsing through some work emails at my desk in my apartment in Brussels. In fact, I took a second look. It seems like an eternity had passed since we had a genuine chat. I merely looked at the screen for a while, wondering if something was amiss. "Hello," I answered, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. "Tessa." "Hi." Janet sounded cheerful, which was both relieving and confusing. "How are you? How's work going? Are you seeing anyone?" The questions came rapid fire, as if we were close sisters who regularly caught up on each other's lives. I told her about my job, mentioned that I was single but focusing on my career, and admitted I wasn't sure when I'd be coming back home. "That's actually perfect," Janet said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I just started college. Did Mom and Dad tell you?" "No, they didn't mention it," I replied. "We hadn't talked much lately either." "Well, I did. And guess what? I talked to Mom and Dad, and they said I could stay in your apartment while I'm in college. Isn't that great? It's only 2 blocks from campus, so I won't have to spend money on transportation. Plus, I won't have to pay rent, which is a huge help." I gripped my phone tighter, trying to process what I just heard. The casual way Janet announced her plans to move into my apartment made my blood boil. Taking a deep breath, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Janet, wait a minute." I cut into her enthusiastic planning. "You can't just decide to move in there. You should have asked me about this first, not Mom and Dad." "Asked you?" Janet sounded genuinely confused. "Why?" "Mom and Dad already said it was fine." I pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting back my growing frustration. "Because you need my permission, not theirs. You can't just move in there because they said so." "But they said." "I don't care what they said." I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. I softened my voice slightly. "Look, Janet, I appreciate that you're trying to figure out your living situation, but this isn't going to work." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Janet spoke again, her voice had that same maddeningly calm tone our mother used when she thought she was being reasonable. "I don't see why not. You're in Europe. The apartment is just sitting there empty." "It's not sitting empty," I corrected her. "And what happens when I decide to come home?" I could return from Europe at any time. Where am I supposed to live then? Janet let out a small laugh that made my jaw clench. Oh, come on, Tessa. You make really good money at your job. If you come back, you can just rent another place. It's not like you can't afford it. I sat there in stunned silence. The sheer audacity of her suggestion that I should rent another apartment while she lived rent-free in mine left me speechless for a moment. The assumption that because I had a good job, I should just give up my home to her, it was unbelievable. No, I said firmly, my voice cold. Absolutely not. I'm not going to rent another place just so you can live there for free. This isn't happening, Janet. But Mom and Dad. I don't care what Mom and Dad said. I nearly shouted. The answer is no. Without waiting for her response, I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking as I set it down on my desk. I spent the next few hours trying to distract myself with work, but I couldn't focus. The conversation with Janet kept replaying in my head. I knew it wasn't over. In our family, nothing ever ended with just one conversation. Sure enough, just as I was heating up leftovers for dinner, my phone started buzzing. Mom's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice, taking deep breaths and preparing myself for what was coming. Finally, I answered. Hello. Tessa. My mother's voice had that particular tone I knew all too well, the one that meant I was in trouble, like I was still a teenager who'd broken curfew. We need to talk about what happened with Janet. I moved to my couch, abandoning my dinner. Yeah, I guess we do. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this, she started in. You shouldn't treat your sister like this. She's family. It's just for a little while she's in college. Nothing terrible will happen if Janet stays in the apartment. I ran my fingers through my hair, fighting to keep my voice level. Mom, I can't just let her move in there. What happens when she doesn't want to leave? I'm not going to end up fighting with my sister to get her out of my apartment. Oh, don't be dramatic, Mom scoffed. That won't happen. You don't know that, I countered. Besides, why can't you guys help her rent her own place? Why does it have to be my apartment? There was a slight pause before Mom answered. We've already spent all our money on Janet's college tuition. We can't afford to pay rent on top of that. I stood up and started pacing my living room. Well, I don't want her living there. Who knows what could happen to the place? And besides, I'm renting it out right now. I'm getting income from that apartment. If Janet moves in, I'll be the one paying the bills while she lives there for free. Well, I could hear her trying to think of a response. Unless, I added, you and Dad want to pay me rent for Janet to live there? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then my mother's voice came back, sharp and angry. I can't believe how brazen and selfish you're being, demanding rent from your own sister. What's gotten into you? Selfish? Now I was the one getting angry. How is it selfish to want to keep my own apartment, the apartment that I bought with my own money? Or did you forget that I paid you and Dad $120,000 for it? That has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with this. I was practically shouting now. I didn't get this apartment for free. I bought it with my money. My hard-earned money. The line went dead. The next week dragged by in complete silence. No calls from Mom. No messages from Janet. Nothing. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach that grew bigger each day. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. But it was never them. I was in the middle of a presentation at work when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. I ignored it, but whoever it was called 3 more times. During my lunch break, I finally checked. It was Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister. We weren't particularly close, but she'd always been the voice of reason in family disputes. Tessa, her familiar voice came through the line. What's going on with your family? I just talked to your mother, and she seemed, well, not herself. I sighed and closed my office door. It's a mess, Aunt Sarah. Over the next 20 minutes, I poured out the whole story, Janet's call, Mom's reaction, everything. Aunt Sarah listened without interrupting, making only small sounds of acknowledgement. I see, she said when I finished. Have you tried talking to Janet again? Call her. I mean, it sounds like there might be some misunderstanding here. What's there to misunderstand? I asked, slumping in my chair. They want my apartment for Janet. End of story. Honey, Aunt Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem. Call your sister. Video call her so you can see each other's faces. Try to understand where she's coming from and make sure she understands where you're coming from, too. I wanted to resist, but something in her tone made me reconsider. Maybe she was right. Maybe we needed to clear the air. That evening after work, I took a deep breath and initiated a video call with Janet. To my surprise, she answered almost immediately. She looked tired, her usually neat hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Can we talk? Janet nodded, her expression guarded. I need to understand something, I started. Why are you so set on living in this particular apartment? Why not rent your own place? Janet's face hardened slightly. Why should I rent somewhere else when Mom and Dad said I could stay in their apartment? You lived there for 4 years, now it's my turn. They said it was fine. I felt like I'd been slapped. Their apartment? Yeah, Janet said, lifting her chin. Mom and Dad's apartment. They inherited it from Grandma, remember? They said I could live there while I'm in college, just like you did. For a moment, I just stared at her through the screen. Then, without a word, I reached for my laptop and pulled up my files. Janet, I need to show you something. I shared my screen and opened the folder containing my property documents. This isn't Mom and Dad's apartment. It hasn't been for years. Look at the date on this deed of sale. Look at the purchase agreement. I bought this apartment from them. I paid them $120,000 for it. The silence that followed was absolute. Janet's eyes widened as she scanned the documents, her mouth falling slightly open. But that's impossible, she whispered. They told me, they said. She shook her head. This doesn't make any sense. Why would they lie about this? How could they forget selling you the apartment? I watched Janet's face on my screen as she processed the documents I'd shown her. She looked pale, confused, and somehow younger than she had just moments before. I felt a sudden surge of sympathy for my sister. Well, I said, trying to lighten the mood, at least the money went to a good cause. Mom told me they used it to pay for your college tuition. Janet's head snapped up. What? The money from the apartment sale. I explained. Mom said they spent it on your education. Janet let out a strange laugh that sounded more like a sob. Tessa, I'm on a full scholarship. Mom and Dad haven't paid a cent for my education. Now it was my turn to stare in shock. But Mom just told me last week that they couldn't help you with rent because they'd spent all the money on your tuition. We sat in stunned silence, both processing this new revelation. Then Janet spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. Do you remember when I wanted those dance classes in middle school? She asked. Mom told me they couldn't afford it because they just bought you a new laptop for college. What? I shook my head. I never got a laptop from them. I saved up from my summer job to buy one. Janet leaned closer to her screen. And remember that summer camp I wanted to go to? The one all my friends were attending? Mom said they couldn't send me because they just paid for your college application fees. But I applied for fee waivers, I said slowly. I handled all my college applications myself because they told me they'd spent all their money on your new school uniforms. School uniforms? Janet's eyebrows shot up. My school didn't even have uniforms. We spent the next hour trading stories, each one more revealing than the last. A pattern emerged. Whenever either of us had asked for something, our parents had blamed their inability to provide it on having just spent money on the other sister. It was like putting together a puzzle where none of the pieces matched the picture we'd grown up believing. The next morning, I called Aunt Sarah. My head was spinning from everything Janet and I had discovered, and I needed someone else's perspective. Aunt Sarah, I said as soon as she answered. I talked to Janet last night. We found out that Mom and Dad have been lying to us. For years. They'd tell each one of us they couldn't buy something because they'd spent money on the other. But none of it was true. They told Janet the apartment was still theirs when they'd sold it to me years ago. They told me they spent the money from the sale on Janet's college, but she's on scholarship. Nothing adds up. I heard Aunt Sarah take a deep breath on the other end of the line. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with what sounded like long-held guilt. Tessa, honey, sit down. There's something I need to tell you about your parents. Something I should have told you years ago. I didn't want to cause problems in the family, but, well, I think it's time you knew the truth about how your parents really treated you and your sister. I sat on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for Aunt Sarah to continue. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes before she finally spoke again, her voice heavy with regret. Your parents, they weren't what you thought they were, Tessa. They weren't struggling to make ends meet like they always claimed. Your grandmother, she gave them money every month. A substantial amount. Specifically for you and Janet. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you mean, specifically for us? She wanted to make sure her granddaughters were well taken care of, Aunt Sarah explained. But your parents, they spent that money on themselves instead. The bare minimum went to you girls. They'd buy the cheapest groceries for home, get you the most basic necessities while they... She paused, as if struggling with the words. While they what I prompted, though part of me didn't want to know, while they lived like royalty. Behind everyone's backs, they were always eating at expensive restaurants, shopping at high-end stores, and those trips they took 2 or 3 times a year, their business trips. I felt my stomach drop. Mom and Dad always said they had to travel for work. There were no business trips, Tessa. They were luxury vacations. They'd leave you girls with your grandmother, telling her they were going somewhere with an unsuitable climate for children. In reality, they were staying at 5-star resorts, going on cruises, living it up, while you and Janet stayed behind. Memories started flooding back. All those times they'd drop us off at Grandma's, their matching designer suitcases in the car trunk. I remembered how excited they'd always looked before these business trips, how they'd come back tanned and relaxed. It all made horrible sense now. How did you find out? I managed to ask. Aunt Sarah sighed deeply. It was an accident. I ran into your mother at a restaurant one day, a very expensive one, when she was supposed to be on a business trip. She was wearing a brand new designer outfit, jewelry I'd never seen before. When I confronted her about it, she trailed off. I could hear the pain in her voice when she continued. Your mother threatened me, Tessa. She said if I told your grandmother about any of this, she would turn her against me. She knew how to manipulate your grandmother, had her completely convinced that she could do no wrong. Your mother said she'd make sure I was cut out of the inheritance entirely. And you kept this secret all this time? I couldn't keep the accusation out of my voice. We had a huge fight about it, Aunt Sarah's voice cracked. Your mother and I didn't speak for years after that. And yes, I kept quiet. I'm so ashamed of that now, Tessa. I should have spoken up. Should have done something. But I was afraid, and I'm so sorry. You and Janet deserved better than this. You deserve to know the truth. I sat in stunned silence as my aunt's revelation sank in. All those years, all those memories of careful budgeting and modest living, it had all been a lie. My parents hadn't been struggling. They'd been splurging. Just not on us. I can't believe this, I finally managed to say. We lived so frugally. Mom would spend hours cutting coupons, telling us we had to be careful with money. They never took us on a single vacation, not one. Everything Janet and I owned came from sale racks or discount stores. Even our groceries. I let out a bitter laugh. Mom would drive across town to shop at the cheaper supermarket, saying we had to watch every penny. I stood up and started pacing my apartment, too agitated to sit still. And you know what the worst part is? They made us feel guilty for wanting things. Normal things that kids want. They'd lecture us about being materialistic if we asked for new clothes or wanted to go on school trips. Tessa, Aunt Sarah started, but I couldn't stop now. And college, God, the college thing makes me so angry now. Do you know what they told me from the time I was little? They drilled it into my head that they couldn't afford to help with college. They said I had to study hard and get scholarships because there was no other way. I spent my entire high school career terrified of getting anything less than perfect grades because I thought my future depended on it. I could hear the strain in my voice, years of stress and anxiety bubbling to the surface. I worked so hard for those scholarships, Aunt Sarah. So did Janet. We both did. And now you're telling me. Your grandmother made specific provisions in her will, Aunt Sarah cut in quietly. She left your mother extra money, a significant amount, specifically earmarked for both of your college educations. It was a condition of the inheritance. Your mother was supposed to use that money to put both you and Janet through college. The phone nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. What? Your grandmother wanted to make sure both her granddaughters would get a good education. She knew how important that was. I sank back onto the couch, feeling like all the air had been knocked out of me. But Janet and I both went to college on scholarships. They never gave us a penny for tuition. They told us they couldn't afford it. I know, Aunt Sarah said softly. They kept all that money for themselves, just like they kept the monthly allowance your grandmother gave them for your care. The next morning, I requested an emergency vacation from work. My boss must have heard something in my voice because he approved it immediately. Within 48 hours, I was on a plane home. Janet met me at the airport, and we spent the entire drive to her dorm room talking about everything Aunt Sarah had revealed. I can't believe they did this to us, Janet kept saying, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. All those times they made us feel guilty for wanting things. We arrived at our parents' house that afternoon. It was strange how normal everything looked, the same well-maintained lawn, the same expensive car in the driveway that they'd claimed was a necessary business expense. How many lies had we believed over the years? Mom answered the door with a smile that quickly faded when she saw both of us standing there. Girls? What's this about? We need to talk, I said firmly, walking past her into the house. Where's Dad? In his study, she replied, following us as we made our way through the house. What's going on? We found Dad sitting at his desk, reading something on his tablet. He looked up in surprise as we all filed into the room. Well, this is unexpected. We know everything, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. About the money Grandma gave you for us every month. About the money she left specifically for our college education. About all of it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mom's face went blank while Dad slowly put down his tablet. Aunt Sarah told us, Janet added into the silence. About how you spent the money on yourselves. About your fancy restaurants and expensive vacations while we were eating budget groceries and shopping at discount stores. I expected denial. I expected anger. What I didn't expect was my mother's calm, almost dismissive response. Well, she said, straightening her designer blouse, I don't see what there is to discuss. We did nothing wrong. We fed you, clothed you, raised you. No one can accuse us of child abuse. Nothing wrong. I felt my voice rising. You took money that Grandma gave you specifically for us and spent it on yourselves. We lived the lifestyle we deserved, Dad chimed in, his voice equally unperturbed. It was our money to spend as we saw fit. Your money. Janet's voice cracked. It was Grandma's money. She gave it to you for us. Mom waved her hand dismissively. What's done is done. You can't prove anything now anyway. The money's long gone. The casual way they admitted it, without a hint of shame or remorse, felt like a physical blow. They weren't even trying to deny it anymore. They simply didn't care. You know what? I said, suddenly feeling very calm. You're right. The money's gone. But so is our relationship with you. Janet and I walked out of that house and never looked back. That was 6 months ago. Things are different now, better in many ways. Janet and I talk almost every day. I helped her find a nice apartment near campus, and I cover her rent. It's the least I can do for my little sister. She found a part-time job at a local coffee shop to cover her other expenses, insisting on being as independent as possible. Last week, Janet and I had dinner together at her new place. We talked and laughed for hours, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Looking at her across the table, I realized something. Our parents might have stolen our money, but they accidentally gave us something valuable in return. In trying to keep us apart with their lies, they ended up bringing us closer together than ever before.